I'm 70 now. My marriage has survived decades most don't. But if I could go back to 40, when I thought I knew everything, there are 5 truths I'd whisper to myself. Truths that would have saved years of silence, resentment, and missed connection. At 40, I thought I had it all figured out. My marriage had lasted nearly 20 years by then. We had routines, we had responsibilities, we had a rhythm that felt like stability. I looked around at friends whose marriages were crumbling, and I felt quietly proud. We weren't fighting, we weren't dramatic, we were fine, and I believed that being fine was enough. But what I didn't see, what I refused to see, was that fine isn't the same as fulfilled. Survival isn't the same as thriving. My marriage wasn't falling apart, but it wasn't exactly alive either. We were coasting. We had stopped asking each other real questions. We had stopped being curious. We moved through our days like two people sharing a house, not a life. And I didn't notice because I was too busy, too distracted by work, by kids, by everything else that felt urgent. At 40, you're in the thick of life. You're managing so much that your marriage becomes background noise. You assume it'll just keep running as long as you don't break it. But marriages don't work that way. They need attention. They need care. And when you stop giving them that care, they don't explode. They just quietly fade. The warmth disappears so slowly, you don't feel it leaving. You wake up one day and realize you've been living next to a stranger for years. I remember sitting across from my spouse at dinner one night, and we had nothing to say. Not because we were angry, not because something had happened. We just didn't know each other anymore. We had stopped sharing our thoughts, our worries, our dreams. We were polite, we were functional, but we weren't connected. And the terrifying part was that I had convinced myself this was normal, that this was what marriage looked like after 20 years. I told myself we were mature, that we didn't need constant conversation or romance, that we had evolved past that. But I was wrong. What I called maturity was actually neglect. I had let my marriage become a checklist. Are the bills paid? Are the kids okay? Are we getting along? Check, check, check. But a marriage isn't a checklist. It's a living thing. And like anything living, it needs nourishment. It needs attention. It needs presence. And I wasn't giving it any of that. I was giving it my leftover energy, my distracted glances, my half-listening, and my spouse was doing the same. At 40, I was so confident in my marriage because it hadn't broken. But I didn't realize that just because something isn't broken doesn't mean it's whole. I thought stability meant success. I thought the absence of a crisis meant everything was fine. And that blindness, that comfortable ignorance, cost me years. Years I could have spent truly knowing my partner. Years I could have spent building something deeper than just coexistence. The first truth I wish I'd known is this: your spouse will change, and so will you. And that's not a problem to fix. It's a reality to embrace. At 40, I wanted my spouse to stay the same. Not consciously, maybe, but deep down, I liked the predictability. I liked knowing who they were, how they'd react, what they'd say. Change felt threatening. When I noticed my spouse developing new interests, new opinions, new ways of being, I resisted. I didn't say it out loud, but I was quietly frustrated. This wasn't the person I married. This wasn't what I signed up for. But people aren't meant to stay frozen. We grow. We shift. We're shaped by every experience, every conversation, every year we live. The person I was at 20 wasn't the person I was at 40. And the person I was at 40 isn't the person I am now at 70. I changed, my spouse changed, and instead of celebrating that growth, I mourned the loss of familiarity. I think part of me believed that loving someone meant keeping them the same, that if they changed too much, the foundation of our relationship would crumble. But I had it backwards. Real love isn't about preserving someone in amber. It's about staying curious. It's about meeting the person they're becoming, not clinging to the person they were. And when I finally understood that, really understood it, everything shifted. I started asking different questions. Not, why aren't you the way you used to be, but who are you now? What matters to you now? What are you discovering about yourself? And my spouse started asking me the same. We stopped expecting each other to be static. We stopped punishing each other for evolving. And slowly, we found our way back to each other, not as the people we were 20 years ago, but as the people we'd become. At 70, I look at my spouse and see someone I've known for decades, but also someone I'm still getting to know. And that's not sad. That's beautiful. That's what keeps a marriage alive. The willingness to let go of who they were and embrace who they are. The courage to say, I don't know everything about you, and I'm okay with that. Let me learn you again. Change is inevitable. Resisting it only creates distance. Embracing it creates connection. That's the first truth. And it took me 30 years to learn it. The second truth is harder to admit. Silence isn't peace. It's avoidance. I used to think my marriage was peaceful because we didn't fight much. We didn't yell. We didn't slam doors. We kept things calm, controlled, and civil. And I wore that like a badge of honor. Look at us, I thought. We're mature. We don't need drama. But what I called peace was actually silence. And silence, I've learned, is one of the most dangerous things you can bring into a marriage. Because silence doesn't mean everything is okay. It means you've stopped trying. It means you've decided it's easier to say nothing than to risk saying the wrong thing. It means you're protecting yourself instead of trusting your partner. I can't count how many nights I went to bed with something unsaid. Some hurt I didn't mention. Some frustration I swallowed. Some fear I kept hidden. I told myself I was keeping the peace. I told myself it wasn't worth bringing up. I told myself my spouse wouldn't understand anyway, so why bother? But every time I chose silence, I built a wall. Brick by brick. Conversation by conversation, until there was so much distance between us I didn't know how to cross it anymore. And my spouse was doing the same thing. We were both walking around with unspoken resentments, unvoiced needs, unexpressed love. We were both pretending everything was fine because saying otherwise felt too vulnerable, too risky, too hard. So we stayed quiet, and that quiet nearly destroyed us. The truth is, real peace doesn't come from avoiding hard conversations. It comes from having them, from sitting down, looking each other in the eye, and saying, this is what I'm feeling. This is what I need. This is where I'm hurting. It comes from trusting that your partner can handle your honesty, that they want your honesty. That honesty, even when it's uncomfortable, is the only path to real intimacy. At 70, I've learned that the strongest marriages aren't the ones without conflict. They're the ones where conflict is met with courage, where both people are willing to speak up even when their voice shakes, where silence is replaced with gentle, honest truth. And that's not easy. It takes practice. It takes humility. It takes letting go of the fear that being honest will push your partner away, because most of the time, it's the silence that does that, not the truth. The third truth is about intimacy. And I don't just mean physical intimacy, though. That matters too. I mean the deeper kind, the kind that requires you to be seen, fully, honestly, vulnerably seen. At 40, I thought intimacy was about passion, about romance, about maintaining attraction. And those things matter. But they're not the foundation. The foundation is emotional closeness. It's the willingness to let your partner see you at your worst, to admit when you're scared, to confess when you've failed, to stop performing and start being real. I spent years hiding parts of myself from my spouse, not the big things. The small things, my insecurities, my doubts, my shame. I wanted to be strong, capable, and unshakable. I didn't want to be a burden. I didn't want to seem weak. So I kept my struggles to myself. I smiled when I was sad. I said I was fine when I wasn't. I pretended I had it all together when I was falling apart. And my spouse did the same. We were both performing, both pretending, both afraid that if we showed our true selves, the other person might stop loving us. But that's not how love works. Real love doesn't grow in the performance. It grows in vulnerability. It grows when you stop hiding and start trusting that your partner will hold your mess with care. I remember the first time I really let my guard down. I was going through something difficult and I couldn't keep it in anymore. I broke down. I cried. I admitted I didn't have answers, and instead of pulling away, my spouse moved closer. They held me. They listened. They didn't try to fix it. They just stayed. And in that moment, I felt more connected to them than I had in years. Because I wasn't pretending anymore. I was just me. And that was enough. That's intimacy, not perfection, not performance, just presence, just the truth. And it's the kind of intimacy that sustains a marriage far more than passion ever could. The fourth truth is simple but brutal. You can't fix your partner. You can only fix yourself. I wasted so much energy trying to change my spouse. I didn't call it that, of course. I called it helping. I called it supporting. I called it caring. But really, I was trying to mold them into the version of themselves I thought would make our marriage easier. I nudged. I suggested. I quietly criticized. And none of it worked. Because people don't change because you want them to. They change because they want to. And sometimes they don't change at all. And that has to be okay. What worked was changing myself, changing my expectations, changing my reactions, changing the stories I told myself about what my spouse's behavior meant. I stopped taking things personally. I stopped assuming their struggles were about me. I stopped waiting for them to become someone different and started loving them as they were. And that shift, that internal shift, changed everything. At 70, I understand that the only person I have control over is me. And that's not a limitation. That's freedom. It means I don't have to wait for my spouse to fix our marriage. I can start by fixing my own heart, by letting go of resentment, by choosing kindness, by being the partner I want to have. And most of the time, that's enough. Most of the time, that creates the space for real change to happen. Not because I forced it, but because I modeled it. The fifth truth is the hardest and the most important. Forgiveness is a daily practice, not a one-time event. I used to think forgiveness was something you declared. You had a conversation. You said the words. You moved on. Done. But real forgiveness doesn't work that way, because hurt doesn't disappear just because you decide it should. It lingers, it resurfaces, and if you're not careful, It builds up until you're drowning in resentment you thought you'd already released. Forgiveness, I've learned, is something you choose every single day. It's waking up and deciding not to hold yesterday's hurt against your partner. It's letting go of the scoreboard. It's choosing grace, even when they make the same mistake again. Even when you're tired of forgiving, even when it feels unfair. Because marriage isn't about keeping score, it's about showing up again and again with love, with patience, with mercy. At 70, I know my marriage has survived not because we're perfect, but because we're committed to forgiving each other. Every day, every fight, every disappointment. And that's not a weakness. That's strength. That's love. That's what keeps a marriage alive when everything else says it should have ended years ago. If I could go back to 40, I'd tell myself this: don't wait for a crisis to pay attention. Don't assume your marriage will thrive on autopilot. Love is intentional, connection is intentional. And the most beautiful marriages are the ones where both people choose every single day to stay. Not because it's easy, but because it's worth it.